Having exceptional skills in performing various beautiful musical masterpieces that can mesmerize entire crowds is a skill that only a few possess, and others can only envy the ones that can do so. And you know what happens to those that can truly impress people with their talents. They get bathed in coin by doing so. The bard makes its living by going from district to district to perform, captivating the hearts of the regular folk one by one, making sure they can't get enough, and let them patiently wait for the bard's next appearance in that part of the city that they live close by. But while on the surface the bard appears to be a talented musician, a professional storyteller, do not be mistaken. Some bards, including the bard that you will get to know today, transcend that idea of just knowing how to play the violin or the flute. Things get dark really quickly when you realize how powerful the bard is that we will talk about today, controlling entire crowds, whether they are friendly or hostile, like it's nothing for its own or its companions' purposes and goals. It's just one of the many powers of the bard. Having the tools to assassinate anything and anyone at any time from any distance is another one. And finally, making sure the bard and his companions live through their adventures and can tell the tale for the years to come. With the bard in your team, you will make sure that nobody ever dies. The Lore Bard is a monstrous class, especially if you multiclassed a bit to fully unlock its potential, and especially if you follow my build and gear recommendations for it. And in this video, you'll see a Lore Bard so powerful that it can do literally everything. This is the absolute strongest Lore Bard controller support type of build possible, in my humble opinion, obviously. It can crowd control very effectively and multiple targets at the same time as well. It has really good buffs and debuffs. It has great damage, it has great zoning and area control. It heals for very high numbers. It makes you the king of role-playing, and it makes sure you'll beat any difficult encounter. No problem whatsoever. So let's get right into it. At level 1, we're going to start off and get our first level in Cleric. Yes, this is very important. Don't immediately start off with Lore Bards. The reason why we get Cleric is to get that nice shield proficiency that will come in very handy later on, as well as various armor proficiencies for more AC and more armor options. For cantrips, I highly recommend Thaumaturgy to make you a role-playing god when it comes to charisma checks, resistance for the higher chance to succeed saving throws, and guidance for the higher probability to succeed ability checks. For my build, and to make sure our healing becomes really significant, we're then going to go with the Life Domain as your subclass. This domain also gives us the Bless spell for free, which is incredibly powerful. That will make it so that our entire team has a higher likelihood to actually hit our targets, while also having a higher likelihood to succeed saving throws. Are you getting annoyed by missing your targets when you attack them? Well, Bless helps out very well with that. The passive feature of the Life Domain subclass is really good as well for the idea of this build that I'm going with. It's one of the elements that is going to buff our healing, because as you can read, it adds additional healing to our healing. Really good. For your starting abilities, Charisma and Constitution are going to be our most important abilities. Charisma because most of our spells will scale with it, and Constitution because we will be using a lot of powerful concentration spells that we want to keep active as long as possible. Then 14 Dexterity for the initiative, so that our Bard isn't the last person on the field that has a turn, and some points in Wisdom as well for the Wisdom checks and saving throws in this game. Now, another major benefit that you get if you start with Cleric is that you get 2 spells to prepare, and you can immediately get 2 of the most overpowered spells in the game. Go to your spell book and prepare both Command as well as Sanctuary. Sanctuary is basically just cheating. It gives you immunity. You can't get hit after casting it. And it's extremely good in this setup because we can cast one of our powerful concentration spells first and then use Sanctuary as a bonus action. Because Sanctuary is a bonus action, that makes it even better, to make sure the enemies don't have the possibility to hit us with the intention to try try to break our concentration, keeping up the powerful spell. So what that essentially means is that we will maintain our concentration spells pretty much always with this combo. Now Command on the other hand is an absolute monster spell as well. It has multiple options when you cast it, and my favorite ones are the drop one. The drop one just makes your enemies drop their weapon and essentially skip a turn, or you can just steal their weapons and render them completely useless as well. It's a very powerful option. Command Flee is also great. If things get intense for you or your team, just make your enemy flee. And on the other hand, pretty much the opposite of that spell, Command Approach is very good as well versus ranged enemies that are much weaker in melee space. So you use Command Approach and then they'll come to you, and accordingly you can completely destroy them. Now with the mentioned spells, you will have a fantastic start. For level 2, we're going to start investing levels into Bard. So we immediately start multiclassing at level 2, get a level in Bard, and for our cantrips, you definitely want to get Vicious Mockery. Vicious Mockery is just a nice starting cantrip for the early levels. It deals damage and it debuffs our enemy by making them more likely to miss their next attacks. And then for the other cantrip, it doesn't really matter what you take. You can take anything really. For your spells, however, Bard gets some really good spells right off the bat. First of all, we need Healing Word. This is the best early game healing spell, and it's better than Cure Wounds just for the fact that you can cast it from a distance, and it's also a bonus action healing spell, so you can always use Healing Word after you do your main action, and that's also a part of the reason why it's so good. Take it as a tool to heal early on. For your second spell, I highly recommend getting Dissonant Whispers. Not only does it deal 3d6 damage, so it's actually really good damage for a level 1 spell, it also makes your enemies frightened, which is a great CC effect that makes enemies unable to move, as well as get disadvantage on their ability checks and attack rolls. Then for your third spell, I highly recommend getting Tasha's Hideous Laughter. I've talked about this great spells before in other videos, but it's essentially a stun on a level 1 spell. You usually want to use it on the big target that you don't want to prioritize early on, so like the boss or mini boss within all the enemies, and make sure they're removed from the battlefield in that sense by causing them to be prone in an endless loop of laughing to give you an easier time to focus on all the other enemies and smaller targets and kill them off first. It's just a great CC tool for that purpose. For your fourth spell, absolutely get Longstrider. Longstrider gives your entire team more movement when you upcast it, so definitely upcast it, and more movement means more options in combat, whether it's aggressive or defensive. Also, Longstrider is a ritual spell, so you don't consume a spell slot when you use it, making it even better. The choice for your instrument doesn't matter, by the way, just pick the one you like the most. You know, which one do you like to play the most? That is the only question you have to ask yourself. For level 3, we get another level 1 spell, and I'm going to be recommending Speak with Animals right here. Now, Speak with Animals opens up like a bunch of extra content in this game and dialogue, because you can now speak with animals, and a lot of animals in the game have actual dialogue and quests related to them. So for role-playing purposes, as well as just experiencing Baldur's Gate 3 as much as possible, this is a fantastic spell. At level 4, we get another level in Bard, and now we can choose our subclass, and we're absolutely going to go with the Lore Bard. Lore Bard is just the best option for an all-round controller, support type of monster Bard that can also dish out significant damage, and choosing a Lore Bard, you also get the very powerful Cutting Words reaction. Cutting Words can make enemies miss their attacks altogether as part of it being a reaction, or make your allies hit an enemy that would have otherwise missed. Basically what happens is that your Bard shouts something mean to make your enemies lose confidence in themselves, which results into them missing you or your allies hitting them. So from a role-playing perspective, this is absolutely what we want. Insulting your enemies is everything we need. For your spell here, absolutely get Hold Person. Hold Person is such a devastating ability. It can completely control the battlefield in your favor because your enemies can't do anything accordingly. Can't move, can't attack, can't do anything. And everything that attacks these enemies that have been cursed to have this spell applied on them will now be critted against when you or your allies attack them in melee range. So in addition to the CC it provides, it also boosts your damage output significantly as well. A very good spell. For the role-playing skills, just put points in whatever you want really. All the charisma ones are nice, and perception is also really good for making sure traps don't get to you, or you finding hidden switches and things of that nature. At level 5 we get a feat. I would suggest to get 2 points in charisma through ability improvement, and for your spell I would suggest to get Blindness. Blindness is a great CC spell that doesn't require concentration effect, making it a really good tool for having a higher chance to hit your attacks as well as your enemies missing their attacks, and it also reduces the range of how far your enemies can attack, so it's great versus ranged enemies and casters and mages and all those things. At level 6 we now unlock level 3 spells, and immediately I would recommend you to get Hypnotic Patron. This is an absolutely amazing spell, especially because you can get it relatively early, like Act 1. It can pretty much shut down the entire battlefield if you cast it, as it's an AoE type of cast, unlike the other CC spells in the game where you have to target enemies, and accordingly Hypnotic Pattern shuts down everything within the radius of the spell, which is also quite significant. And literally shuts down because hypnotized enemies cannot attack, cannot move, and they become statues, giving you all the room to just completely wipe them out. At level 7 then, I highly recommend getting the Glyph of Warding as your second level 3 spell. This is a really good spell for a bard, as it gives you huge area control. Now, if enemies are standing in the glyph, there's a variety of effects that can apply to these enemies, ranging from great AoE damage to AoE damage with secondary effects, like electrocuting enemies, to straight up making everyone inside of the glyph fall asleep. The AI of enemies is also programmed in a way that they try to avoid this glyph sometimes, which in turn will naturally generate various choke points in other spots. Accordingly, you can then place another AoE type of spell that deals damage over time in a certain area in said choke points to make sure you punish them for trying to bypass the glyph. All in all, amazing spell, great for CC and zoning as well as damage. Now at level 7 you also unlock your first magical secrets as a bard, and you can honestly take a lot of different things right here. But before I tell you the secrets that you absolutely need to know, make sure to give the video a like, subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and also hit the bell right now. Otherwise you won't have access to the remainder of this video, unfortunately. So hit that subscribe button. Oh, nice, you did it. Thanks. Let's move on. The one magical secret that is going to be mandatory for this build is going to be Mass Healing Word. Mass Healing Word is absolutely amazing for this build, as like earlier indicated, we're going to ramp up our healing in various ways, like through our gear, but also our life domain class feature, for example. And Mass Healing Word heals your entire party, making it a great option to make your survivability as high as possible. One more thing then, we're going to use gear that is going to give additional effects to our healing, like giving Blessing and Blade Ward to whatever is being healed, and now those buffs apply to our entire party with one spell cast. It becomes insanely good when you consider the synergies, but more on that in a second when we get to gear. Now for your second magical secret, you can take various things. Spirit Guardians, for example, is really good if you don't have like a Cleric in your team. Fireball is always nice AoE damage and a great option, but if you don't have any sorts of Hunger of Hadar yet, I would strongly suggest you take Hunger of Hadar here. Insanely good AoE spell that fits the idea of this build perfectly, because it does both crowd control, zoning, as well as damage all in one. Everything that is caught within the void of Hunger of Hadar will be slowed, will be blinded, and will take 2 sources of damage, both at the start of the enemy's turn and also potentially at the end of the turn. So it basically has everything, and it's just a great spell for a controller type of caster that also deals damage, just like our Lore Bard. At level 8 then, I highly suggest to multi-class some more and get another level in Cleric. Reason why we get the second level in Cleric at level 8 is because 1, we made sure to get our first magical secrets as soon as possible. That will give us a lot of extra power as a bard, and 2, because now Preserve Life really starts to shine in terms of healing. Preserve Life is the ability that is tied to a life Cleric, and is what you get at level 2 Cleric, and earlier on it isn't that impressive, but like past level 7, 8 and so, its heal gets really impressive actually, as it scales with your level. And post those levels it starts healing a ton, and it does so for your entire party in one go. And it then recharges also per short rest, as it's tied to your divinity charges, so we can use it quite often. Just a really good healing spell, all things considered. Now for your third Cleric level 1 spell, I would suggest now preparing Create Water. Create Water has a ton of synergy with doubling any source of damage that is either cold or lightning, and so it can prep up your Storm Sorcerer, for example, if you have one in your party. But just within our own class we also have synergy, for example making our target sweat, and then accordingly use the Lightning Glyph for extra damage. Or for example use Create Water, then summon a Water Myrmidon through the Conjure Elemental spell that we're absolutely going to get at a later level, and use its freezing attack to deal insane damage with this combo. At level 9 we unlock level 4 spells, and I highly recommend you to get Confusion, just a really good spell that can make enemies attack each other or essentially just skip turns completely. It causes absolutely mayhem on the battlefield and is really good for controlling the battlefield as well as getting damage in simultaneously. At level 10 I suggest to get more damage, because we are now absolutely loaded with crowd control, so I suggest to take Cloud of Daggers. Cloud of Daggers is in particular amazing when you use it at choke points, as enemies cannot ignore it in those cases and will take damage. damage, and it does great damage actually, especially for a level 2 spell and especially over time, as once you drop it, it stays there to deal damage. That is obviously if you maintain the concentration. Now, as you may or may not have noticed, we have quite a bunch of concentration spells at this point. So for our next feat, the Warcaster feat is pretty much going to be a no-brainer to take for our next feat. Warcaster is going to make sure our concentration spells keep being applied. With it, we get advantage on our saving throws for maintaining concentration, and with our high constitution level and some gear pieces that I will go over in a second, we will rarely ever lose concentration going forward. And that is obviously really good when we have so many different powerful concentration spells that have different use cases. Oh, and you also get Shocking Grasp to use for your reaction. At level 11, we get the opportunity to finally get level 5 spells, because we have now reached level 9 Bard. And level 5 spells are really good. First of all, absolutely get Halt Monster. Halt Monster is like Halt Person, but you now also have the possibility to hold all the non-humanoid type of enemies in the game. And if you upcast it, you can do so on 2 powerful non-humanoid enemies at the same time. So being swarmed by those big robot enemies in the game at the same time is now not so scary anymore. Just hold them, and just like with Halt Person, accordingly all our attacks will critically hit, so we can also additionally make quick work of them. Now at level 11, I would suggest to swap out your Blindness, because we already at this point have a lot of other spells that do something similar, or Hunger of Hater that also blinds your enemies, but then as an AoE spell, and I would get another level 5 spell in the form of Dominate Person. Dominate Person can sometimes be very clutch when you just want to use one of your enemies and make it your minion essentially. They will start fighting. So it's one less enemy on the battlefield to worry about and one additional source of damage on your side. Level 12 is another big one because we get a bunch of good stuff. First, for the cantrip, I would suggest to get Light if you haven't yet. It can help out tremendously with illuminating things in dark spaces. And for your spells, I'm going to be recommending Greater Restoration. At this point in time, you basically have literally everything except for a great tool that can remove CC on anyone in our party consistently. And Greater Restoration does exactly that for when it's needed, and it's really good for that purpose. Now we get 2 more magical secrets at level 12, and we get to choose 2 very powerful ones in fact. The first one is going to be the Bard exclusive spell, Banishing Smite. You can only get this spell as a Bard, so we just have to take it, and thankfully it is really good. Especially the ranged version of this spell is insane. It does 5d10 force damage, and as you may or may not know, force damage is really good as there are barely any enemies in the game that have resistance to it, and thus it will deal amazing damage all the time. You will straight up one-shot enemies with this spell as you see here, and if the enemy has high HP or is not instantly killed, it has a great chance to banish your enemy. So your enemy will simply be completely removed for the battlefield for a few turns, giving you a lot of momentum in combat through that way as well. You really can't go wrong with this spell. For your other magical secret, I'm going to be absolutely recommending Conjurer Elemental. We already have literally everything in this build, but why not also give ourselves a powerful summon? That is exactly what Conjure Elemental is. You can summon an elemental based on the various elements, and they all have their own abilities. These elementals have a lot of HP and their attacks actually hit quite hard as well, so for all intents and purposes you essentially now have a party consisting out of 5 members instead of 4. As these elementals stay with you till they die. The water one is personally my favorite. Like earlier mentioned, it has great synergy with Create Water, and without it, it also deals really good damage. It has both an AoE spell as well as a spell that you can multi-target. And then also with that comes a healing ability that heals for a very significant amount. But the other Myrmidons are great too. Like the fire one can deal a ton of damage in a short time because it comes with haste, so you can make it deal 2 attacks per turn. And then the earth one has cool abilities as well and comes with some nice AoE capabilities. And also again, great damage. You can easily kill enemies with these elementals just by themselves. And which elementals you personally like the most. But Conjure Elemental is definitely an amazing spell to have and pretty much completes our roster of spells. If you then look at our hotbar and our spells, you will now see that we have a very diverse set of spells. We have a ton of healing at the left side of our hotbar. We then also have a bunch of defensive as well as offensive buffs for combat, as well as buffs for role-playing in the form of the yellow spells. Then we have a lot of crowd control in all kinds of different ways, and we have a lot of these pink type of spells that embrace that idea. Then at the right side of our hotbar, we have a bunch of really good damaging spells as well as just more crowd control tied in with that damage. To summarize, one peek at our hotbar and you see we have literally every instance of combat and non-combat covered with this build, making it it an absolute S+ tier build and really bringing home that controller support type of build. To quickly summarize the leveling process then, here is our leveling visualized. We started off at level 1, dipping into Cleric, then took 6 levels of Bard, then got another level in Cleric and finished off with 4 more levels in Bard after that, making us end up with a beautiful 10 Bard 2 Cleric multi-class distribution. Now finally, there's one more aspect to talk about that will take our build truly to the next level. Gear. And I have great news because a lot of the gear for this build can be obtained as early as Act 1 and stays very powerful till the end of your playthrough essentially. For gear, let's start off with the items that will make our healing absolutely bonkers. Both of our rings contribute to this cause. First, we have the Whispering Promise, which is going to give everything we heal bless. Yes, that great spell that we talked about earlier will be now applied to everything we heal. And we're also going to get the Ring of Salving to increase our healing with 2 HP every time we heal. So that stacks very nicely as well. For our boots, we then get the Boots of Aid and Comfort, which is going to heal our targets with another 3 HP every time we heal yet again. And then we get the Reviving Hands Gloves for the final synergy with our healing. This amazing piece will give all our targets Blade Ward every time we heal them. Blade Ward essentially halves any physical damage we get, so it's insanely good for our survivability when we get it on top of our healing for free. And much better instead of having to use the cantrip and waste our action on just Blade Ward for just one target. And these gloves gives us Revivify as well in addition, for if one of our allies dies, we now have a tool to bring them back to life. Great news is that there's also a little brother version of Reviving Hands that you can get very early on in Act 1, called the Hellrider Sprite. It's exactly the same in the Blade Ward application of the effect. You can use that till you get the Reviving Hands gloves. Our healing will now be absolutely super buffed going forward, since we have AoE heal in our kit and we now also heal a bunch of extra compared to the usual thanks to various gear pieces. Our healing is also buffed thanks to our subclass features, and then everything we now heal gets buffed all across the board through Bless as well as Blade Ward. Keep in mind that you can use the heals even if your allies are full HP, since it's a bonus action anyway, so you can get Bless and Blade Ward on top of your main action like that as well at any time for your entire party in one go. It's really good. To complement our healing capabilities, we are also going to run the Amulet of Devout, which gives us an additional Channel T Divinity charge, and as you know, our Preserve Life spell is fueled through these charges, so we can now use 2 Preserve Lives per short rest instead of just 1, or 8 Preserve Lives per long rest since they reset every short rest. And we have 3 short rests as a bard. Like earlier mentioned, Preserve Life heals a ton and applies to everyone in your party. So doubling the number of times that we can use this spell is huge. For our other gear pieces, we're going to get the Helm of Baldur, which is insane for our survivability and upkeep of spells thanks to the armor class, saving throw bonuses, and heals every turn. And the fact that we can't be stunned nor receive critical hits with this thing makes it an absolutely amazing piece for this build. For our cloak, we're then going to get the Cloak of Protection for again more survivability and sustain. For our chest piece, we're then going to use the Adamantine Splint Armor, which again gives us a lot of extra sustain and survivability, and also applies the Reeling Stainless effect on enemies that hit us, which is very nice. It also has a whopping 18 armor class and it's obtained very early on, making it an absolutely amazing armor piece. Then we also get the Viconia's Walking Fortress for our shield, which gives us the Rebuck of the Might reaction, and this is a really nice retaliation type of reaction that deals damage and can knock our enemies prone. The shield also gives us advantage against saving throws and disadvantages for spell attack rolls against us, and it just goes on as the shield, and also gives us additional 3 armor class as well as 2 spells including Warding Bond, which is an absolutely amazing spell. Warding Bond is honestly just really OP. It gives resistance to every single type of damage in the game to an ally that you want to apply it on, as well as extra armor class and saving throw bonus, and stays all the way till the next long rest. And even though it stays active all the way through, it is not a concentration spell, making it very overpowered, and honestly I would cast on an important ally in your team every single rest. For your bow, we get the Darkfire bow just to make sure our bard gets even more resistances, and the bow also gives you haste, which can be really nice as you can use it on yourself or any ally to double the actions per turn. And finally, we use Valar Aloof as our main weapon, which is another weapon that you can get very early on. And what makes this weapon in particular nice for a bard is its Sing and Shriek abilities. These are lasting effects that basically affect everything around your bard in a certain radius. Now, if you use the Sing ability, your allies get a buff to their attack rolls and saving throws. But I personally like the Shriek one more, as it applies negative penalties to your enemies, but also makes them get thunder damage every time someone in your party hits them. And this extra damage can stack up really quickly, as our party will always at a very minimum consist out of 4, and many builds will allow you to hit enemies multiple times per turn as well. So stack all those various sources of additional thunder damage, and it's going to be a very significant bonus to your damage output. And with that, we have now discussed everything in terms of our gear. As you see, our gear will super buff our healing capabilities, will give us a ton of survivability and sustain, and also give us relevant buffs to the damage output of our entire team. Now, in terms of defense, you will notice that our resistances and armor class is very high, because when we get attacked, we will quite often pretty much resist all of the incoming damage, as you see here, or the enemy will just miss us altogether. With that being said, we have now covered everything for this build, and I think this might be the best all-round build ever made, because you can do literally anything and be extremely powerful. Whether it's healing, buffing, debuffing, dealing good damage, crowd control, area control and zoning, summoning, as well as role-playing. It just has it all, literally. Enjoy playing with this build, you will have a really good time. Make sure to subscribe, like the video and hit the bell to always stay notified, and also let me know your thoughts in the comments.